Hey, what's going on, American Literature? It is Mr. Roff here, and it is Thursday, April the 23rd. Today, we're going to continue our reading and discussion of The Crucible, Act 1, but we're going to be focusing on Part 2 of that act, so from pages 25 through 48. Now, before we get into the reading today, I want to give you some context about some terminology that we've been using. I want to define some of the terms we've been talking about in our essential questions. And the two terms I want to really focus on today are groupthink and hysteria. Now, groupthink is very much what it sounds like. It is when a community of individuals begin to start thinking the exact same way. So it's when a bunch of people who are normally rational, reasonable individuals start doing things that don't make sense. They start behaving in an illogical or irrational way. And they do that because they desire to conform to the group. They desire to conform to the way that everybody else is thinking. Right? So when they act without thinking, a group of people do that because they're together. This image over on the left-hand side of the screen over here, I think really does a great job of capturing what groupthink is all about. Right? It's a bunch of people blindly following each other because they don't know any other way to do it. So that's what groupthink is. And when we use the term groupthink, that's what I'm referring to. Now, hysteria, right? Hysteria is a term you might be more familiar with, right? It is some uncontrollable outburst of emotion, right? Frequently that's fear, but it could be other things too, right? You can have laughter that is hysterical. You can have anger that is hysterical. You can have joy, I guess, that is just hysterical, right? You're hysterically happy and you can't control it, right? So when you think about hysteria, we often associate that with something negative, but it could be positive. And before you start to read, consider some examples of hysteria that you've seen. Maybe those could be personal examples that you've experienced in your own life or in the life of your family. Maybe it is a global or historical example of hysteria. And groupthink and hysteria are closely linked. Okay, they're closely aligned. Because frequently, when groupthink leads us down a negative path, that can also cause what we would describe as mass hysteria. Okay, and so that's another term that's important. So mass hysteria is when everybody or a large group of people are acting in this hysterical way, in this way based purely on emotion, right? And so some psychologists believe, and this is what the quote here says, that mass hysteria is a form of groupthink. In cases of mass hysteria, the group members all develop a common fear, right? So there's some fear that's in common that spirals into panic. You know, I hate to bring up examples of what's going on right now with COVID-19, but there are tons of examples of mass hysteria. A lot of it has to do with things that people are purchasing, right? So toilet paper is impossible to find any place in the store because of mass hysteria, right? Everybody thinks the same way. This group think, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of toilet paper. And so that leads them to this panic buying, which is really a form of mass hysteria. So there's plenty of examples you could think of in today's world where that's happening. Okay, and so the group members feed off each other's emotions and emotional reactions, causing that panic to escalate. So be on the lookout today in the reading for mass hysteria examples. They will be there. Also, before we jump into the reading, I want to talk about some new characters. Like I said, we're going to meet a lot of new characters throughout the course of this play. These are the three I want to focus on today. Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey, and Reverend John Hale. Now, Rebecca Nurse and Giles Corey are two of the older, more respected individuals within this community. We'll talk more about them later. But then Reverend John Hale, he's actually someone from outside the community. He is a reverend who comes in, who's brought in by Reverend Paris to help with whatever's going on, whatever the situation is. He is a consulting reverend, essentially, and he's got some experience in things like witchcraft. So be on the lookout for those three characters. At this point, we're going to read. So you can pause the video and you can finish reading. So 25 through 48, the second half of Act 1. And you'll notice there is no reading guide today. There's no reading guide at all. All you're going to do is post to a discussion board and record your Flipgrid example, but you don't have to fill out the reading guide for the second half of Act 1, just the first half, all right? So go ahead and pause the video, read, and I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk now about some key scenes and discussions that characters have throughout the course of Act 1, Part 2. And I want to jump in with two of the new characters that we meet, with Rebecca Nurse and Giles Corey. Now, we're not going to focus too much on Giles Corey. He comes in and talks about lawsuits and things like that. But Rebecca Nurse, she provides a warning for the town. She provides a warning for the characters. And we can find this on pages 27 and 28. Rebecca is an experienced woman. She's seen a lot of life, right? She's older, she's wiser. And what she is trying to get these characters like Reverend Paris and Mrs. Putnam to do is just relax, right? Chill out. She says, calm yourselves. I have 11 children and 26 times a grandma, right? This woman, she's got some experience with kids. This is what she describes as a silly season, right? And you can see that here on page 27, right? Whenever their silly season is done, they come to, they'll run out, and there's just childish mischief. She'll wake when she tires of it. Don't worry. Don't panic. And she knows that this panic can be dangerous because of what it can lead to. Right on page 28, again, Rebecca says, this will set us to arguing again in the society, and we ought to have peace this year. We ought to really rely on the doctor now and a good prayer. There's nothing to be afraid of here. And if we give in to fear, if we give in to what is causing us anxiety, it's going to cause problems. If people are shouting witchcraft, right? There's prodigious danger in the seeking of loose spirits. Right? We don't want to have that happen again. Okay, so Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey to some extent, they're really preaching caution, calm, relax. Now, there's other people who aren't preaching that, and one of them is Thomas Putnam. Now, we talked about last time for Act 1, Part 1, that Thomas Putnam is using this as a way to gain power. And we see that in the way that John Proctor talks about power with with Thomas Putnam. Okay, and this gets into some of the comments about democracy that we can make. So, Proctor to Putnam, you cannot command, Mr. Paris. We vote by name in this society, not by acreage. So in a truly democratic society, right, in a truly democratic society where everyone's vote is the same, money and wealth can't provide additional power. And that's what Proctor's saying to Thomas Putnam, right? He's saying, just relax. Now, Reverend Paris isn't sure he likes this democratic thing, right? He's like, okay, there's some problems that might arise here, right? There's some issues that could come up, right? I don't necessarily know if I want my status in this town to be based on when you all feel like you want me to be here or not be here, right? And since there's a tie between the religious community and the government, Paris is understanding that could be about a whim, right? Someone's whim. Okay, I'm looking for that particular line. Where are we? Yeah, here we go. Oops, sorry. I do not wish to be put out like the cat whenever some majority feels the whim. Right? That a minister is the Lord's man in parish, so not lightly crossed or contradicted. But this part of when the some majority feels the whim. Now, in our previous book, John Steinbeck was massively in favor of the democratic rule because he says the rule and will of the people is what matters. And Mayor Orden highlights that frequently. But Arthur Miller here, through the character of Reverend Paris, he actually highlights a different aspect of democracy, the danger of democracy, how it can be corrupted, the whim of the people, right? Or when there's panic that sets in. That can cause some issues with democracy. And Arthur Miller says this as much on page 33 and 34, right? So top of page 34, he says that the devil may become a weapon designed and used time and time again to whip men into a surrender to a particular church or church state, right? That there is a sense that you can use panic to make people believe in a particular ideology, whether or not they want to. That happened in the 1950s with these communist witch hunts that were going on, that Miller's addressing, right? If we said somebody's a communist, that could actually help that particular individual be pushed towards one cause. And I think that occurs even today. If you think about some of the movements, like the hashtag #MeToo movement that's happened in the last 5 years. Everybody's afraid and fearful of being accused of something And so they have to sort of bow and cower to a particular group's ideology and that particular group's worldview. So notice how that's working in this play. Okay, let's go to Reverend Hale, page 36. Reverend Hale enters. He's a younger reverend. He kind of imagines himself as a young doctor. And when he arrives, he's talking with Reverend Parris, the very bottom of the page. I'm going to slip to a different highlighter color, right? Oh, look at these books, right? They're heavy. Hale, setting down the books, they must be. They are weighted with authority. So Reverend Hale's coming in thinking that he has authority. And it's important to note that where does that authority come from for him? Well, it's through the books. So he thinks there are logical, rational answers to the questions that are happening within this town, right? So he is book smart, but I don't know if he's necessarily wise, right? And so there's a difference here between the wisdom of Rebecca Nurse and the book knowledge of a Reverend Hale. Okay, he relies on science, or he says he's relying on science, even though maybe this isn't exactly very scientific, right? He says, we cannot look, page 38, by the way, to superstition in this. The devil's precise. The marks of his are precise, as definite as stone, right? So there has to be certain indicators that he's looking for, just like a scientist would make observations. That's what Reverend Hale says he's doing. And then a little bit later on page 41, right, he says, if the devil is in her, if the devil is in her, you will witness some frightful behavior in this room. Right, I'm sorry. It says, mark me right in the middle of the page. The devil is in her, you will witness some frightful wonders in this room, so please keep your wits about you. Right, so if she's truly possessed, you're going to see some things. And what's fascinating is that the girls, right, the young women, Abigail Williams and her posse, they're listening to this. You're going to see some frightful wonders. And this comment really serves to set up everything that happens later. So Reverend Hale and Reverend Parris bring in Abigail Williams, right? And they begin to interrogate her. They're asking her questions. Now, we know that Abigail has already said previously that if somebody's coming after me, I'm going to fight back, right? I'm going to bring a pointy reckoning, is what she says in Act 1. And so she starts bringing that pointy reckoning very clearly in this particular scene, right? She begins confessing, right? She tries to get Betty to wake up. And then she's like, I never sold myself. I'm a good girl. I'm a proper girl. And then finally, when Tituba enters, instantly, Abigail points to her. She made me do it. She made Betty do it, right? So she finds a scapegoat. She sees Tituba, who was a slave. If we're going to be honest, she was an easy scapegoat for Abigail to point to. Someone who had very little rights, who had maybe a past where she might have had some strange customs, at least to these Puritans. Abigail finds her scapegoat. And so in a fit of self-protection, she names Tituba and lists behaviors that would mark her as a devil worshiper, right? And so she begins to say things like, she made me drink blood, and she makes me speak and laugh at church and laugh at prayer. All this list of markers, indicators of witchcraft. So Reverend Hale is like, of course, this is exactly what we would expect, right? This is exactly what I would have expected. And he starts questioning Tituba. When did you compact with the devil? When did you make a deal with the devil, right? When was it? And so then Tituba, and just like Abigail, begins to experience interrogation. She begins to experience hysteria, panic. And she's like, what do I do? What do I do? Well, page 47, rocking back and forth, staring ahead. She knows her life is on the line here. She knows the life is on her line here. And she decides to name names. And I look, and there was Goody Good. I, sir, and Goody Osborne, right? She starts naming people, accusing people of being witches, of being the devil's people. And Mrs. Putnam, right, who has some authority in the town, she's like, I knew it, right? This confirms everything I've already thought. I knew she was a devil worshiper. I told you all along, right? So these accusations are valid because they're supported by other people in the town, like Mrs. Putnam, like Ann Putnam. And then Abigail, she sees the hysteria building and growing in Tituba, and she's like, yes, this is exactly what I want, right? She's inspired. She cries out, I want to open myself, right? I dance for the devil. I wrote in his book. I want to go back to Jesus. I saw, just so happens, Sarah Good with the devil, and Goody Osborne with the devil, and throw in a fresh name, Bridget Bishop with the devil, right? And then Betty, right? Betty rises from the bed, right? In a fever in her eyes. And she's like, I saw these people, George Jacobs. I saw Goody Howe, right? And Reverend Hale, rather than being like, okay, these girls are crazy, these girls are liars, there's skepticism. No. Reverend Hale, who is the authority, he says, glory to God, it is broken, they are free. So these girls, these young girls who got caught dancing in the forest, they found a way to get out. They found a way to get out of it. They're going to accuse people of witchcraft. We were bewitched. We're victims here. We're victims of Goody Good and Goody Osborne and Bridget Bishop and George Jacobs and Goody Howe. 5 individuals who've been named. Hopefully you're seeing the groupthink and the hysteria at work in this particular act. All right, let's jump back to the slides, because I want to just give you a few more instructions for today. After reading, so you've read, now it's time to post to Flipgrid. So hopefully you can find the link on Google Classroom. What you're going to do is you're going to choose a line or a passage from Act 1 that you want to perform, that you want to show off to your classmates. It can be anything from page 2 all the way to page 48. And there's some really fun lines. What you're going to do is you're going to go to the Flipgrid post, and I can just take you there to remind you what it looks like. Okay, here's American Literature, Mr. Roff, The Crucible, Act 1. There's mine you can watch. You're going to choose a line or passage, and you're going to record yourself. Click the little plus there. It might prompt you to go to the app. You can always have the app available to use. You'll be able to watch your classmates' posts as well as post your video. Keep it under 2 minutes. In fact, there's a maximum limit that I've provided for 2 minutes, nothing more than 2 minutes. And again, this is all about just having some fun, right? Have some fun with this. Be creative. All right, the next thing, the discussion post. So just like you've done with previous discussion posts on Google Classroom, there's a question. And it says this: how are groupthink and hysteria influencing and controlling the events of the play so far in Act 1? How might making decisions using groupthink be dangerous? Consider both the text and the real world. So that's really what you're going to talk about in your discussion today. Again, you should write about 3 to 5 sentences in a paragraph, providing your answer and your reasoning, and respond to some of your classmates' prompts as well. If you have any questions, again, I'll be available today for office hours between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so please feel free to reach out to me at that point. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on Friday.